He asked them to lay him on the ground, not on a bed, not on a cushion, not even on straw, on the bare earth, the same earth he had praised his sister, the same earth he had chosen over palaces, over silk, over everything the world calls comfort. He was 44 years old, nearly blind, his body spent, and he was singing. This is the story of a merchant's son who gave everything away, a young man who went to war and came back asking different questions. A fool, his enemies called him that, who turned foolishness into fire and set the medieval world ablaze. His name was Francesco, and he changed everything. In the heart of medieval Italy, in the year 1181 or 1182, a child was born in the bustling hill town of Assisi that spills across the slopes of Monte Subasio in Umbria. The town smelled of bread and horse and damp stone. Merchants haggled, church bells rang the hours. In the house of a wealthy silk trader, a boy entered the world and was baptized Giovanni. But his father, Pietro di Bernardone, was away in France on business. France, the country he loved above all others, the source of his fortune and his fashions. When he returned and held the child, he changed the name on the spot. He would call him Francesco, the little Frenchman. It was a choice that carried no prophecy in it, just a merchant's pride. But the name stuck to the boy like a second skin. Francis grew up the son of a man who could afford to be generous, and he grew up generous to excess. He wore the finest clothes in Assisi, perhaps the finest in all of Umbria. He led the town's young men in song through the streets at midnight. He threw parties that lasted until dawn. He was what every young nobleman wanted to be, handsome, loose with money, easy with laughter. Yet even then, even in the middle of all that noise, small silences crept in. Once, distracted mid-sale at his father's cloth stall, he turned away a beggar who asked for alms in God's name. He caught himself almost immediately, abandoned the customers, ran after the man, and pressed every coin from his pocket into the beggar's hands. His friends laughed. His father raged. Francis couldn't explain it himself, only that leaving the man behind had felt unbearable. Something was already moving in him. He didn't have a name for it yet. In 1202, war came. Assisi and the rival city of Perugia had long hated each other, the hatred of neighboring Italian towns, petty and total. Francis marched off with the other young men of Assisi, armored in dreams of glory. The Battle of Collestrata was a catastrophe. Assisi lost. Francis was captured and thrown into a Perugian dungeon, where he spent nearly a year among the sick and the dying. He kept his spirits up. His companions later remembered his strange, stubborn cheerfulness even in captivity. But illness took hold of him there, hollowing him out. When he was ransomed and returned to Assisi, the city looked the same. He did not. The parties no longer satisfied. The songs felt thin. He would sit alone for long stretches, staring at the Umbrian hills, searching for something he couldn't name. In 1205, Francis tried once more to chase the old life. He set out to join the papal army heading south to Apulia, dreaming of winning his spurs under the great Count Walter of Brienne. He had new armor, a new horse, renewed ambition. He made it as far as Spoleto. There, in the night, a dream, a vision, a voice. Accounts differ on the details. They agree on the message. Go back. The knighthood you are seeking is not the kind you imagine. Francis turned around. He rode back to Assisi. His old friends were mystified. One of them, laughing, asked if he was planning to take a wife. Francis smiled in a way that unsettled the question. Yes, he said, a fairer bride than any of you have ever seen. He was speaking of Lady Poverty, though he barely knew it himself yet. The conversion deepened in stages, as conversions do. He made a pilgrimage to Rome, tossed his own fine purse onto the tomb of St. Peter in a sudden gesture of abandonment, then traded his clothes with a beggar and spent the day begging alongside the poor at the basilica's steps. It was an experiment, a taste. It terrified him and thrilled him in equal measure. He returned to Assisi and began disappearing into the caves and grottos in the hills. He prayed for hours, sometimes all night, crying out to God, wrestling for clarity, for a calling, for something solid to hold on to. His friends assumed he had gone mad or fallen in love. Then came the encounter that cracked him open permanently. On the road outside the city walls, Francis met a leper. Not unusual on those roads, leprosy was common. The lepers visible, segregated, feared. Francis had always found the disease viscerally repulsive. The smell alone had always been enough to make him wheel his horse around and ride the other way. This time, he didn't ride away. He dismounted. He walked toward the man. He pressed coins into his hand. And then, something he could not explain or plan, he embraced him and kissed his hand. He later wrote that in that moment, what had seemed bitter was turned to sweetness. The self that had been fastidiously afraid, the silk merchant's son, party leader, the aspiring knight, met something larger than itself on that road, and yielded. Not long after, while praying alone in the ruined little chapel of San Damiano outside Assisi's walls, Francis heard a voice from the painted Byzantine crucifix above the altar. It was clear and direct. "Francis, Francis, go and repair my house, which, as you can see, is falling into ruins." He took it literally. He rushed home, loaded bolts of his father's finest cloth onto a horse, rode to Foligno, sold the cloth and the horse both, and returned to San Damiano with the money. When the frightened priest refused to take it, terrified of Pietro's wrath, Francis simply left the coins on the floor and walked away. His father's rage was not long in coming. Pietro seized Francis, dragged him home, beat him, and locked him in a storeroom. His mother freed him while Pietro was away. Francis walked back to San Damiano and began begging for stones to rebuild the chapel with his own hand. The final break came in 1206, in the piazza in front of the bishop's palace, before a watching crowd. Pietro had hauled his son before Bishop Guido to demand repayment of the stolen money and a formal disinheritance. It was meant to be a legal proceeding. It became something else entirely. Francis stood before the bishop, before his father, before all of Assisi. He said nothing in his own defense. He simply began to undress, tunic, belt, shoes, underclothes, until he stood naked before everyone. He folded the clothes and handed them to his stunned father. Then he spoke, "Until now I have called you my Father on earth, but henceforth I can truly say, Our Father, who art in heaven." The bishop, tears in his eyes, moved quickly to cover the young man with his own cloak. Pietro stood there holding the clothes. The crowd was silent. Francis walked out of the city, singing. For a time, Francis lived as a hermit and scullion in the hills, working in a monastery kitchen, sleeping rough, begging for food, continuing to repair chapels with his hands. The Porciuncola, a tiny chapel dedicated to St. Mary of the Angels in the plain below Assisi, became his center of gravity, the poorest chapel in the region. Naturally, in February 1208, during Mass at the Porciuncola, Francis heard the Gospel reading from Matthew's 10th chapter, the passage where Jesus sends out his disciples with nothing: no gold, no silver, no spare cloak, no walking staff. He heard it as a personal instruction. He took off his shoes. He put down his staff. He exchanged his leather belt for a knotted rope. He put on a rough, shapeless tunic. And he went out to preach. The message was simple: repentance, peace, the nearness of God's kingdom. He preached in churches when they let him in. He preached in town squares when they wouldn't. He preached to anyone who would stop walking long enough to listen. And something in the way he spoke, some quality of joy, some absolute credibility, made people stop. Within a year, he had gathered 12 companions around him. The first was Bernard of Quintavalle, one of the wealthiest men in Assisi, a man who gave away his entire fortune after a single night of conversation with Francis, and then followed him into the roads. There was also Peter Cattaneo, a distinguished church lawyer, and Brother Giles, a simple peasant from the Assisi countryside, who joined on impulse and became one of the movement's great mystics. 12 men. They lived at Rivo Torto, an abandoned leper hut in the fields, small enough that Francis scratched each man's name on the beams above his sleeping spot, so no one would quarrel over space. They worked with their hands, cared for lepers, begged when they had nothing, gave away anything they received. They called themselves the Friars Minor, the lesser brothers. Minor, less than everyone else by design. In 1209, Francis wrote the first rule for his brotherhood, nothing elaborate, just a collection of gospel verses commanding them to follow Christ without softening or compromise. Then, he and his 11 companions walked all the way to Rome to ask for papal approval. Pope Innocent III was not an easy man to see. He was the most powerful pope of the medieval era. Brilliant, political, imperious. His cardinals advised him against meeting this barefoot band from Umbria, predicting either heresy or irrelevance. But Innocent had a dream. He saw the Lateran Basilica, the mother church of all Christendom, tilting, leaning, about to fall, and a small, ragged man with his shoulder pressed against the wall, holding it up. The next morning he granted Francis an audience. He gave verbal approval to the Order of Friars Minor. The Franciscans were born. In 1212, the movement acquired its most unlikely and essential voice. A 17-year-old noblewoman named Clare, from one of Assisi's most prominent families, had been listening to Francis preach at the Cathedral of San Rufino. She had been listening for months, perhaps years, feeling the same fire he described without knowing how to act on it. On the night of Palm Sunday, she cut her hair, slipped out of her family's palazzo in the darkness, and ran to the Porziuncola. Francis was waiting with his brothers. He received her vows, covered her shorn head with a veil, and gave her the simple tunic. Her horrified family came the next day to bring her back. She would not go. She and her sister Agnes eventually settled at San Damiano, the same crumbling chapel where Francis had first heard God's voice. They became the Poor Ladies, later called the Poor Clares, an order of women living in absolute poverty and contemplative prayer that still exists across the world today. Clare would outlive Francis by 27 years and become a theologian and leader in her own right. She is not a footnote. She is a co-founder. Francis preached everywhere, in churches when they invited him, in fields when they didn't, and in the stories his brothers told afterward, creation itself seemed to become his audience. One afternoon on the road, he saw a great flock of birds gathered in the trees and fields ahead. He told his brothers to wait and walked into the middle of the flock. They did not scatter. He stood among them and began to speak, to preach, just as he preached to people, and the birds opened their beaks, stretched their wings, tilted their heads downward. Not one flew away until he had finished and made the sign of the cross over them. Whether one reads this as miracle or metaphor, it tells us what the people around Francis believed about him, that the divisions human beings have erected between themselves and the rest of creation simply did not apply to this man. In the town of Gubbio, a wolf had been terrorizing the region, killing livestock, killing people. The town was frightened. Francis walked out to meet it alone. In the story as it was told and retold, he addressed the wolf directly, acknowledging that its violence came from hunger, making a covenant on behalf of the townspeople. They would feed it. It would stop its killing. The wolf bowed its head and placed its paw in Francis's hand. It lived peaceably among the townspeople for 2 more years, until it died of old age, mourned by everyone who had once feared it. The story of the Wolf of Gubbio is legend. We cannot verify it as fact. But legend is how communities preserve moral insight, and the insight here is precise. Francis did not try to destroy the threat. He tried to understand it. He sought terms. He made peace. He saw in the wolf not a monster, but a hungry creature responding to its circumstances. It was, in miniature, his entire theology. Success brought complications that Francis had not anticipated and could not fully manage. Within a decade, the Friars Minor had spread across Europe into France, Spain, Germany, Hungary, the Holy Land. Thousands had taken the habit. The tiny brotherhood that had scratched names on beams at Rivo Torto was now a major institution of the medieval church, whether Francis wanted it to be or not, and institutions have their own logic. Friars began building permanent houses, arguing for libraries, requesting dispensations from the rule's harsh poverty. The learned brothers wanted to study. The pragmatic brothers wanted structures. Some cardinals wanted to bring the Franciscans closer to the church's existing machinery, to make them more useful, more manageable, more orthodox in their organization. Francis resisted. He had not founded a school or a monastery. He had tried to found a way of life, poor, mobile, dependent on nothing, wedded to nothing, free to serve anyone. The moment the order began to accumulate property, even collectively, the heart of the thing was compromised. He knew it, and said so, and was only partially listened to. Near the end of his life, he would step back from leadership of the order he had created, naming others to govern it. It was one of the quieter sorrows of his life, to watch his radical vision be gently, institutionally, lovingly absorbed into the system he had hoped to renew. In 1219, Francis did something that still astonishes historians. The Fifth Crusade was underway, its forces besieging the Egyptian port city of Damietta. Francis sailed to Egypt, passed through the front lines, and walked unarmed into the camp of Sultan al-Malik al-Kamil, a nephew of Saladin, a sophisticated ruler and scholar, surrounded by his court and his military commanders. Francis preached the gospel to him. He proposed a debate between Christian and Muslim theologians. He reportedly offered to walk through fire to prove the truth of his faith, an offer the Sultan declined, perhaps out of genuine respect, perhaps because he had no interest in watching a man burn. What is certain is this: al-Kamil listened. He found Francis remarkable. He gave him safe passage back to the Crusader lines, and he later arranged for Franciscan friars to have protected access to the holy sites in Jerusalem, an arrangement that, in various forms, persists to this day. Francis had sailed into a war to make peace. He had walked toward the enemy and found a human being. In the century of the Crusades, this was not merely unusual. It was nearly incomprehensible. In September 1224, Francis withdrew to the remote mountain sanctuary of La Verna in the Apennines for a 40-day fast before the Feast of Michaelmas. He was ill, nearly blind from an eye condition he had contracted in the East, worn down by years of travel, fasting, and an unrelenting physical austerity that had exceeded even what his brothers could follow. On the feast of the exaltation of the Holy Cross, he saw a vision, a six-winged seraph, one of the highest orders of angels, nailed to a cross, descending toward him in fire and brilliance. The vision was overwhelming. When it faded, Francis looked at his hands. The nail marks were there. In his hands, his feet, his side, the wounds of Christ appearing in his flesh. He tried to hide them. He wrapped his hands in his habit sleeves, walked with a slight lean to conceal his side. But those who were close to him saw. His brothers washed the wounds. They wept. Francis told them not to tell anyone. These are the first documented stigmata in Christian history. Whether one understands them as miracle, as psychosomatic manifestation, or as something that eludes both categories, the wounds were real, attested by multiple witnesses who lived with him afterward. He bore them until his death, in constant pain, for the remaining 2 years of his life. The winter and spring of 1225 were among the worst of Francis's life. His eyes had deteriorated to the point where even dim light was agony. He spent weeks in a darkened hut at San Damiano, unable to see, barely able to move, plagued by mice that ran across him in the night. Clare and her sisters cared for him. In the middle of this darkness, he composed his masterpiece. It came to him, he said, as a gift, the Canticle of Brother Sun, the first great poem written in the Italian vernacular by a man who could barely see the page and may have dictated it aloud. It is an act of praise so complete, so unburdened by suffering, that it remains disorienting to read knowing the circumstances of its composition. Most high, all-powerful, all-good Lord, all praise is yours, all glory, all honor, and all blessings. Praised be you, my Lord, with all your creatures. especially Sir Brother Sun, who is the day through whom you give us light. Praised be you, my Lord, through Sister Moon and the stars, and the heavens you have made them bright, precious and fair. Praised be you, my Lord, through brothers, wind and air, and fair and stormy, all weathers moods. Praised be you, my Lord, through Sister Water, so useful, humble, precious and pure. Praised be you, my Lord, through Brother Fire, through whom you brighten the night. Praised be you, my Lord, through our sister Mother Earth, who sustains us, and produces fruits with colored flowers and herbs. Praised be you, my Lord, through Sister Death, from whose embrace no mortal can escape. Happy those she finds doing your will. Praise and bless my Lord, and give him thanks, and serve him with great humility. Later, when a feud broke out between the bishop and the mayor of Assisi, an ugly, petty dispute that was dividing the city, Francis added a verse about forgiveness and sent his brothers to sing the entire canticle in the piazza before both men. The feud ended that day. He used the poem as a peace treaty. He was still himself, even dying. By the summer of 1226, Francis was dying. His body had been failing for years. The stigmata, his eyes, likely leprosy, the accumulated toll of 2 decades of sleeping on stone and eating almost nothing. His brothers carried him by litter from Siena, where doctors had attempted treatment, back toward Assisi, making a wide detour to avoid Perugia, whose citizens might have seized the body of the holy man for the prestige it would bring their city. The procession stopped on the hill above Assisi, and Francis, who could no longer see, asked to be turned so he could face the city. He blessed it. Then they carried him down to the Porciuncola. On the evening of October 3, 1226, Francis asked his brothers to undress him and lay him on the bare earth, the same gesture he had made 20 years earlier before the bishop and his father, returning what had been given him, holding nothing back, going as he had come. His brothers gathered around him. He asked them to read aloud from the Gospel of John, the account of the Last Supper. He sang, or tried to sing, from the Canticle. He blessed each of them. He called for bread and broke it, and passed it around. Then he lay back on the ground. Larks, birds that avoid darkness and fly only in daylight, gathered and circled overhead in the dusk. His brothers remembered it afterward, and couldn't explain it. Francis of Assisi died on the evening of October 3, 1226. He was 44 or 45 years old. 2 years after his death, in 1228, Pope Gregory IX canonized him in what was, even by medieval standards, an extraordinary rush. He was the people's saint before the Church made it official. The declaration only confirmed what had already been true in the hearts of ordinary people across Europe. His body rests beneath the great double basilica built in his honor in Assisi. He would have hated the basilica. He is at peace there anyway. The movement he started has never stopped moving. The Franciscan family, friars, sisters, lay members of the Third Order, numbers in the millions across every continent. The Poor Clares. The order Clare founded with his guidance maintained contemplative houses around the world, living the radical poverty he proclaimed. In 1979, Pope John Paul II declared him the patron saint of ecology, an act of recognition that the man who called the sun his brother and the earth his sister had understood something about the relationship between human beings and creation that his own civilization was only beginning to learn. To articulate, he is patron of Italy, of animals, of ecology, of merchants, improbably, and of the needless poor. But the legacy that outlasts all titles is simpler and harder than any of them. Francis looked at the world and asked, what if we need less than we think? What if the poor man is freer than the rich one? What if the enemy is also a human being? What if the wolf is just hungry? What if Sister Death is not the end of praise, but its final verse? These are not medieval questions. They are every morning's questions. That is the life of Saint Francis of Assisi, not a legend made safe by distance. A man, a merchant's son who heard a voice in a crumbling chapel and took it seriously, who stood naked before his father and walked away singing, who embraced what he feared, who found, in the total surrender of everything, that he had lost nothing that mattered and gained everything that did.